The story of Joseph. Joseph was the 11th son of Jacob, born to him in his old age and deeply cherished. Jacob loved Joseph more than all his children and showed his favor openly, gifting him a richly ornamented robe, a coat of many colors. This act of favoritism bred jealousy among his older brothers. Joseph, unaware of the deepening resentment, shared his dreams with his family. "Listen to this dream I had," he began. "We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." The brothers' jealousy turned to anger. "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" they asked, their hearts hardened. Joseph had another dream and shared it as well. "I had another dream, and this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." Even Jacob, his father, rebuked him gently. "Will your mother and I and your brothers actually bow down to you?" Yet Jacob kept the matter in mind. One day Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers, who were grazing their flocks near Shechem. When they saw him approaching, the brothers' jealousy boiled over into a plot to kill him. "Here comes that dreamer," they sneered. "Let's kill him and throw him into a cistern, and we'll see what comes of his dreams." Reuben, the eldest, intervened. "Let's not take his life," he said, hoping to rescue Joseph later. Instead, they stripped Joseph of his coat and threw him into an empty cistern. As they sat to eat, a caravan of Ishmaelites approached, bound for Egypt. Judah suggested selling Joseph instead of killing him, reasoning they would profit and avoid bloodshed. The brothers agreed, and for 20 pieces of silver, Joseph was sold and taken to Egypt. They dipped his robe in goat's blood and presented it to Jacob, who mourned bitterly, believing his beloved son had been devoured by a wild animal. In Egypt, Joseph was sold to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. The Lord was with Joseph, and he prospered in Potiphar's house. Seeing Joseph's success, Potiphar entrusted him with everything he owned. However, Potiphar's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and tried to seduce him. Joseph refused, saying, "How could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" Undeterred, she falsely accused him of assault, and Potiphar, in his anger, had Joseph imprisoned. Even in prison, the Lord remained with Joseph. He found favor in the sight of the prison warden, who placed Joseph in charge of the other prisoners. While in prison, Joseph encountered Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker, who had been imprisoned for offending their king. Both men had troubling dreams, and Joseph, noticing their distress, offered to interpret their dreams, saying, "Interpretations belong to God." The cupbearer's dream foretold his restoration to Pharaoh's service, while the baker's dream foretold his execution. Both interpretations came to pass. Joseph asked the cupbearer to remember him and mention him to Pharaoh, but the cupbearer forgot, leaving Joseph in prison for 2 more years. Pharaoh himself had 2 unsettling dreams. In one, 7 healthy cows were devoured by 7 gaunt cows. In the other, 7 plump heads of grain were swallowed by 7 thin, scorched heads. None of Pharaoh's magicians or wise men could interpret the dreams. The cupbearer then remembered Joseph and told Pharaoh of the young Hebrew who had interpreted his dream in prison. Joseph was summoned and stood before Pharaoh. "I cannot do it," Joseph said humbly, "but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires." Joseph explained that the dreams foretold 7 years of abundance, followed by 7 years of severe famine. He advised Pharaoh to appoint a wise man to oversee the storage of surplus grain during the years of plenty. Pharaoh recognized the Spirit of God in Joseph and appointed him as governor over Egypt, second only to Pharaoh himself. Joseph, now 30 years old, was given authority over the land. He stored vast amounts of grain during the 7 years of abundance, preparing Egypt for the coming famine. During the famine, people from surrounding nations came to Egypt to buy grain, as the famine spread far and wide. Back in Canaan, Jacob sent his sons to Egypt to buy grain. They did not recognize Joseph, now a powerful ruler, but Joseph recognized them. He tested their hearts, accusing them of being spies and demanding they bring their youngest brother, Benjamin, as proof of their honesty. When Benjamin arrived, Joseph was overcome with emotion but continued his test. He framed Benjamin by placing a silver cup in his sack, threatening to make him a slave. Judah's heartfelt plea for Benjamin's release, offering himself as a substitute, moved Joseph deeply. Unable to contain himself, Joseph revealed his identity. "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. Do not be distressed or angry with yourselves, for it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you." Joseph forgave his brothers and invited his family to live in Egypt, where they were provided for during the famine. Joseph's journey, from betrayal and slavery to power and reconciliation, was a story of God's providence. What his brothers intended for harm, God used for good, to save many lives. This story reminds us that God's plans are always at work, even in our darkest moments. Though Joseph faced betrayal, false accusations, and years of waiting, he never lost faith in God's promises. His story shows that what others mean for evil, God can turn into good. Whatever trials you may be facing, trust that God is with you. He sees the bigger picture and is working all things together for your good. Hold on to hope, remain faithful, and know that your story is not over. God's blessings often come in ways we least expect, transforming our pain into purpose and our trials into triumph.